Hello everyone, it's Lily, and today I'll be going through the fourth route that I played, which is Yves. Now Yves route you actually unlock after playing the other three routes, so it's kind of like a mandatory fourth route. But before I start, this is a spoiler review, so literally I'll be talking about the plot, the character themselves, all the secrets that you kind of review in the way, as well as the two despair endings that you encounter or end up in. And yes, so if you don't want to know anything about the game or the route, then I would swiftly move on. But yeah, in this route it was kind of interesting because you find out a lot about who Ceres is and why she has the powers that she does. And you know, I think it was also the most romantic route out of the four in like the traditional sense. The reason why I say traditional sense is because obviously Lucas's route was romantic, just in a whole different way. But yes, Yves' route is almost like a Cinderella story, but without the happily ever after. It's kind of like you've got the main character Ceres, who is constantly rescued by Yves. Now the reason why I say this is because right from the beginning you find out, or you kind of know the moment you see him, that Yves is the boy that rescued Ceres in the fire. So when Ceres was basically in despair and kind of wanted to die, Yves is the one that came along and rescued her from the fire, and in that great fire I think it was only Ceres and Yves that managed to survive. And so right from the start, even from childhood, he's there kind of rescuing her and protecting her. And you know, actually you find out that Salome and Adolf had actually tried their best to hide the fact that Yves was alive because it might affect Ceres in a way, especially if she bumped into him in the streets or something. So it's kind of interesting how they were trying to hide him away until Ceres comes across him in the common route. But you know, basically his route is that it starts off with Ceres being invited by Yves to join them in their general store, or kurung, because Yves and his partner Hugo work together as like a general store where they take requests and do their best to you know, do the things that they've been asked to do, you know, whether it be like fixing the rooftop or finding the cat or anything like that. And yeah, it's kind of sweet to begin with. You see Ceres and Yves doing their little jobs and you know, being quite happy together. But then right from the start there are little things that are a bit odd almost, in that Yves is very sweet to everyone. And you know, even Hugo says to Ceres, be careful. And initially you're like, what does he mean, be careful? But then you sort of find out that by be careful he means that if I were you, I would not end up liking him or fall for him, because he's not going to see you as anything special. He's not going to love you in particular, because he find out has kind of like made almost like a promise to himself that he's going to love everything and everyone equally, regardless of their past or history or anything. And so, you know, it is one of those routes right from the start you kind of think, okay, so I'm not sure how this is going to develop, because Yves does love everything and there is a good reason. It's because he feels like, so when he actually comes from a happy family, or came from a happy family, you know, he had both parents, he was an only child, he, you know, had things he wanted, there was no problems. But because of this fire, this part of his face gets completely burnt. And it's kind of ridiculous, to be honest. Like, God knows the values of the people in this world. He gets this terrible burn on this part of his face, and you can tell because he always has a mask on, but he has this horrible burn. And it was so terrible that even his parents were like, you monster, you are nothing to do with us, and then, you know, give him away to an orphanage. I'm sitting there going, so everyone's like fearful of this child and telling him how ugly he is, how he's like a monster and all of this. Even his parents? Like, what? I mean, what is wrong with the people in this world? I don't know, you just read it and you go, this is ridiculous. But anyway, so throughout his childhood, he and up until he managed to get this mask from somewhere, he is basically hated by everyone, and everyone fears him. And so I guess because of that, he goes, I didn't get the love that people should, so I want to love everyone so that they get love, and then perhaps one day I'll receive the love back. And I guess part of him doing this general store work is that by doing favors and being nice to people, he receives that affection back, if that makes sense. So midway through the route, he speaks to Celes and he's like, you think I'm this, you know, heavenly person who just gives and only gives, but in reality, all this that I'm doing and how much I love people isn't for the sake of others, it's in a way for myself, because this way I get some love. And it's kind of like, you know, the thing is though, I kind of didn't think there was a problem with that, because I personally am very much the type of person that thinks that humans are always selfish. Every human thinks of themselves, really. It's only rare cases that you think of others. So like, to me that wasn't really a shock or anything. I was like, fair enough, that's more human of you, and I think that's the more beautiful and more, I appreciate that more, rather than just some goody that, you know, acts like they're the best thing in the world because they're being so lovely. No, I can't stand that. So I was kind of happy that he sort of tells Celes this. And yeah, so that happens. Then you've got Hugo, who is kind of like always a bit on the defense. So Celes joins the general store, as you know. She doesn't live with them to start with, but Hugo even then is a little bit uncomfortable with it, I think because he does kind of believe in the whole her being a death god and having death god-like powers and all this. So I think he kind of believes in that a little bit, so isn't too fond of her being near Yves for too long, because he does see Yves, you know, I feel like he thinks of Yves almost as more than a friend sometimes. But we'll talk about that later. And so I guess even the kind of police-like organisation that Adolf is leader of, and Yves is part of also, even the members of them initially are like, I don't know if I want her around us and helping us, if I'm to be completely honest. But then Yves's like, well, you know, well, actually, no, not Yves. Adolf is like, well, you know, how Yves cooks and it's always a disaster. Wouldn't it be nice if Celes, who is a pretty good cook, can cook on the days that Yves normally would? And then all the police organisation people are like, that's not such a bad idea. Because Yves's cooking is so terrible. And so yeah, she gets accepted in a way. However, of course, there continues to be mass murders of like these weird deaths of people. And it seems to be relatively near where Yves and Celes live. So people's suspicions that it's Celes's death god powers just continue to rise, to the extent there's this uprise of them trying to kill Celes ultimately. And then you find out that they all seem to be relivers, and they all seem to be couples. Like when they look through photos of the people who died, they always seem to be pairs, and they always seem to be relivers. And you later learn that it's because relivers have like a capacity on the amount that they can love someone, or the amount that they can feel emotions. And someone had gone into the reliver technology system to lower that capacity, so that all these people were having these almost like stroke-like experiences, where because they were seeing Yves and Celes together, and throughout this route, you know, you keep on saying, oh, I want to be in love with someone like that. So clearly Yves and Celes had an impact on people, and more people were becoming like couples and like loving each other. And then that combined with this system hacking where it reduced the capacity, all these people are having like stroke-like problems. And what happens is that when it goes past their capacity, they have like a problem with their heart, and they try and get rid of their heart, which is why all the corpses were of their hearts like out and grabbed out. And yeah, it's pretty gruesome, as all the other routes have been. What a surprise. But yeah, so you find that out. But the issue is, because Yves keeps on hiding, like taking care of Celes and hiding her from the villagers, despite the villagers liking Yves so much, they keep on like trying to blame him, attacking Celes and all of this. And of course, one of the middle bad endings, if you choose them, is like her basically being killed, and another is Hugo telling her to die. It's just, in fact, let me quickly talk about that. So towards the end, Yves and Celes live together alone in the general store. And one day Hugo comes along and says to Celes, I want you to die because you're making Yves' life a misery. And you can either pick fine, okay, and then, you know, it's a bad ending, or you say no, and then it continues on because Hugo's like, okay, well, at least you have that strong will and you care about Yves and all of this. But if you pick the sure, I'll kill myself one, it's kind of interesting because when Celes dies, her last words are good luck, Hugo, and in a way that she can tell that Hugo has a thing for Yves. So when he says good luck, she's kind of cheering Hugo on to make Yves happy as like a lover type thing. And even Hugo doesn't notice this himself, and it's very much implied. And I've heard that in one of the limited editions, you get like a book that kind of has like an after story, and I've heard like something about there being boys' love, like BL between Hugo and Yves, and there was like some weird uprise about it in Japan because everyone was like, we don't want BL in Otome, we want them separate and all this. And personally, I didn't really have an issue. I wouldn't have an issue with the BL. I feel like everyone didn't have the issue with the BL even in Japan. Like, I think everyone had the issue of there being another character that the love interest ends up with. And I think that's the issue everyone had, not the fact that it was BL. But like when I first found out about this, I was like, Jesus Christ, why are people being so like judgmental and funny about it? Who cares if there's BL in a game? Like, I don't care. Like, what's the problem? But when I found out, I guess it's not the BL, but personally, I think what everyone had a problem with and was still labeling it as the fault of BL was that the LI had another person and ends up together, or I don't know, something happens in this afterbook. I don't know because I haven't read it. But yeah, so that's a bit of drama that happened when I was reading through Yves Route that I thought I'd include in here. It's all very silly. But yeah, so it's interesting to see that where Celes says good luck to Hugo. I thought that was interesting because up until that point, I did think they were good friends, but I didn't think there was actually more to it on Hugo's side. But no, if you continue, it's it basically goes on to the scene. So at this point in time, Yves actually, his mask falls off when he defends Celes, and Yves, because of how every single person up to this point reacts to his burnt scar in like a really negative way, where they either scream or they're scared or they look away or, you know, anything like that, whereas Celes accepted it. She saw him and she didn't scream, she wasn't scared. She literally a bit later when he kind of wakes up, kisses his scar and says she thinks it's beautiful because it looks like the flowers of licorice, so these flowers that if you break they kind of release a weird thing and it kills people, which I'll go into an explanation later on because it's kind of part of the route later down the lines. But so I guess that kind of makes him feel have special emotions towards her because it's the first time anyone said that to him or like touched his wound or anything like that, and it's actually really sweet. It actually was quite heartfelt, and when I watched that bit of this route I felt very like warm and kind of emotional, shall we say. And you also find out that Yves is the descendant of the keeper of the licorice flowers, and in fact he turns out to be the great grandson or whatever of the outsider who happened to arrive onto this island. So he's actually the son of a normal human being that had like a normal lifespan. And it's interesting because the reason why you find out that he's been looking after the licorice plants, these plants, which let me quickly go into an explanation. So in this island, there are a whole bunch of these flowers called licorice plants, or licorice flowers, that are like these black flowers, and they look kind of like Tiger Amaryllis or Higambana in Japanese, which are normally red. But in this island, they're all black. And what you find out is that the reason why they're black is because they're absorbing all the toxins within the soil, causing them to go black. And the reason why people die when they like pick these flowers or destroy them is because when they do, the toxins get released and then they kill the human. So that's why, you know, they're considered the flower of death, despite the fact that they're actually helping the island a tiny bit by absorbing as much of the toxins as possible. And yeah, so he's been like the keeper of the licorice flowers, and he doesn't tell people this because people find it a bit creepy, but he does appreciate that Celes, when he tells her, it's like, oh, I really like licorice flowers because I see them as almost my family because they are feared just like she is. And I think that also is a step towards him feeling special feelings for Celes, which I think was all very cute. It was very like well written how he gradually falls in love with Celes, and you know, it was a cute route. I'm not gonna lie, it was romantic and sweet. But yeah, it was interesting to find out that Yves was the descendant of the outsider, and the reasons behind why they kept on with the upkeep of these flowers. And actually the fairy tale behind it is that the actual death god told the outsider or whoever to maintain the licorice flowers because one day when his bride appears, he wants to be able to give them to her. Now this is a fairy tale, so you know, I guess it's kind of a fairy tale that grew over the time to make sure that the people actually look after the plants, and it's really pretty though. I like it. I think the death god is referring to Anku at this point, but I'm not sure. But I think it was sweet. Now in the middle of this route, the head of the stupid cult that is obsessed with people not being relievers, and I say this because he was evil in the other routes, takes blood from Celes and finds out that she has a strange genetic trait in which her DNA is like the combination of a human, or sort of switches between a human's DNA and a licorice flower's DNA. And he finds that interesting. However, there is one thing that annoys him, and it's that there's some compound or something, like another type of gene, or I don't know, it was like explained kind of difficultly, is kind of interfering with her genes turning into the licorice genes. So that's actually why I guess her powers are suppressed in the individual roots, is because, you know, her licorice side is being kind of sort of suppressed. And the reason why this actually matters is because the reason why she has these like death god like powers, especially previous to the common route before Anku helps her, is that she was born in the licorice flowers, and that kind of affected her in the sense that she acts almost like a licorice flower. So she absorbs all of the toxins inside her and then emits them every now and then, and that's what causes people to die around her. And I guess this thing that's been suppressing those genes is what has been suppressing these powers of hers. But this stupid head of the cult guy doesn't like it, so creates this medication that like sort of gets rid of the suppressor. So she and Yves drinks it because they're told that it's to relax or whatever. And then her powers causes I think Hugo to die, and then Yves to almost die, and she's like in despair. And then I think Xian also finds this out about her, and then wants to use her to fix the problems of this country. And this is where it's like the climax, because she's like, yes, okay, that sounds like a great idea because I've killed so many people. This is the least I can do to help everyone from this curse. And so that happens. Yves wakes up and is like, oh no, I need to rescue her, and Anku's like, yeah, you need to rescue her, and they all go to the research facility. As you know, there are two despair endings if you've watched my other videos, and so I'll talk to you about it. So I guess he and the others learn about the fact that like licorice actually absorb the toxins and stuff because of this book on plants that was buried alongside his grandfather and put in this, like, I don't know what you call it, you know, an urn, that's it, an urn. And that's how they find out the secret behind the licorice plants. And that's when Anku appears and is like, oh, Ceres has been taken by Shuuen, you need to go and save her. So obviously Yves decides to go and save her, like the knight he is. But obviously along the way, things happen. There's a whole bunch of clones of the Blow Killer guy, because, you know, Shuen's made like multiple clones of him, and things get in the way and it's all chaos. And two things can happen. One is that Celes takes Yves' hand and, you know, goes along and says, yes, actually, I do want to be rescued. My selfish thoughts are that I want to be rescued. I want to live normal life as a normal girl, and all of this. And it's kind of like he takes a hand, and then, you know, but then I can't remember. So something happens, and I think an explosion happens amongst the licorice flowers, because she runs off into the licorice field from despair, and then because the toxins that are released actually have flammable properties, what happens is that one of the villagers comes along and sets the licorice flowers on fire, which causes sort of all the, you know, the toxins released to like basically cause a mass explosion, and there's a big fire. But at this moment in time, and oh, this is so grotesque, basically Yves rushes to kind of try and rescue her, and then puts out his hand to kind of for her to grab, as was in the previous fire, as was when she was in the capsule for cloning, as was all this time, except the explosion kills him. And it's quite depressing because of how it happens. Like, you think finally he's gonna rescue her, but he gets killed right beforehand. And the CG is one of her in despair, because there are like two CGs in this Route like ending. One is of her in despair, and then you've got this black, it's so grotesque, you've got this black burnt corpse basically, who she is sort of looking at with despair, with shock on her face. And then immediately after that you see her take his hand and put it on her face like this, and it's obviously this black kind of burnt corpse body. And yeah, it's actually quite, it's pretty tragic. I think it's one of the worst ones. Yeah, no, definitely. And I probably brought the mood of the room or wherever you are down by looking so sad about it. But oh, it was just so, it was so tragic, because it's just that CG. Honestly, the way she's holding his hand, his burnt, completely roasted hand, and yeah, they describe it like, oh, she couldn't even tell what he looked like by that point, and she's just in so disbelief that he's dead, and it kind of ends there. The other ending isn't as bad, I don't think. It's sad, but it's not as grotesque. So what happens is Celes goes, no, I'm going to rescue the world, and before Yves knows it, she's been turned into like this thing where she's like, I guess, part human, part licorice, but more towards the licorice. So she's turned into this person who is able to absorb all the toxins of the world. And what you see is it pans into this scene where Yves rushes towards what's almost like a grave, and then you see like amongst the black licorice plant is like a patch of red ones, because I guess she's absorbing all the toxins into her. It's kind of, you know, the licorice don't have to do it, so the licorice are gradually going red. And I guess it's kind of bittersweet in that Yves' kind of, you know, ancestor was like, I wish one day we can make all the flowers red, and I guess Ceres is kind of doing that. And yeah, it's bittersweet, because obviously Yves didn't want it like that. He probably wanted to see the red plants with Ceres rather than on his own. And yeah, it's sad, really. Sorry, I'm probably making you all depressed by being all depressed by my own. It's so hard not to be. Like, both those CGs were just so sad, and then the other ending was so sad, and everything about that whole route was tragic. Like, oh my god, I just can't believe it. And in the process, in both routes, by this point, Yves has lost Hugo, Yves has lost Adolf, and now he's lost Celes. Like, he's lost everyone, and it's just, yeah, it was sad. But now that we've kind of explored the science behind why people die, let me recap, as if this is a class, let me recap on why people die at the age of 23. So it's all very sci-fi, and I'm trying my best to kind of like make sense of it in my mind, because a lot of it to me doesn't make sense. But the reason why they die at 23 is because there's this toxin that's constantly in the atmosphere, and slowly with time that toxin contaminates each of their 23 chromosomes, because, you know, apparently humans in this world only have 23 chromosomes, even though, you know, we actual humans have 46, but whatever, a pedantic details. So in this world, people only have 23 chromosomes, and every year as they absorb this toxin, one of their chromosomes gets contaminated and basically destroyed. Again, I know normally one chromosome is perfectly enough for someone to die, but hey, whatever, details. With these games, you don't ask these questions, you just accept it. But so every year, each chromosome gets contaminated and destroyed because of these toxins, and as a result, people die after 23 years once all their chromosomes are destroyed. And so the licorice plants are there to help that, like, slow down that process, I suppose, because there was apparently a time when there were not that many, like, the amount of licorice plants decreased, and then what happened was that as a result there were more toxins and people were dying quicker. And onto why the plants kill people again, because the plants absorb all the toxins when they have the toxins inside them, hence why the black petals. Now once that's broken, all the toxins get released at once, and that's what causes people's chromosomes to get contaminated at a quicker rate and therefore die. So that's kind of the science behind it, for those who struggled to kind of understand, because there was quite a lot of Japanese terminology that may be a bit confusing to some, unless you know, do a lot of Google Translate. I mean, some of that I only knew because when I was younger, out of curiosity, I was kind of going through a biology textbook, like a Japanese, I think, high school biology textbook, out of curiosity. So that's the only reason I knew some of the words, well, all the biological words anyway. Yeah, so that's the science behind it. And Celes happens to, because her parents gave birth to her in a licorice field, I guess as a result changes happen to her body. Like, I'm trying to think of it as the toxins are carcinogenic, perhaps it caused mutations in her genes and like her DNA, and as a result she turned into this kind of weird combination between a licorice and human, where her genetics switch every now and then, causing her to have this issue of absorbing all the toxins and then releasing it every now and then. But yeah, and you know, it's just a depressing route all in all, because you learn about this, and there's even more despair, because throughout the whole thing she thought that she was okay, and she was trying hard to believe, and so was Eve, trying hard to believe that it's all just bad luck, she just happened to be next to people who would die. But no, you find out that yeah, it was her all along. And it is interesting to see Shuuen as like the bad guy in this route. But yeah, so I think that's it. I think I've covered everything. I apologise that it's not very chronological. Let me quickly summarise it so that it's a bit easier to understand. So what happens is, you got Yves, he decides to ask Ceres to help him with the general store. Hugo doesn't really like her, but she joins in and gets involved with Yves' life more and more. Yves gradually falls in love with her. They find out, well, Yves tells Ceres that he's actually the keeper of licorice. Ceres is like, oh, that's really sweet because I really like licorice. And then things happen where everyone's like dying and it looks like it's Ceres' fault, so everyone's like blaming her and blaming Yves, and in the process Yves basically Ceres looks at Yves', you know, scar, and then Yves gets upset, but then she says his scar is beautiful, so he further falls in love with her. And then they discover, by going through his grandfather's urn or his ancestor's urn and the plant book that they find, that the reason why they keep the licorice plants is so that, you know, you continue to have these plants that absorb the toxins. And then you find out, because of the head of the cult person, that Ceres is like one of the licorice plants. Shuuen finds out and she agrees to, you know, go along with it. And so the two endings are either she turns into like this thing that absorbs all the toxins and makes the world a happier place, or she runs away, an explosion happens, Yves dies in the process, it's all very tragic and everyone's burned and it's all disaster. And I think that's the summary, and that was I don't know. I guess it's not as interesting as me lamenting over some of the depressing scenes. But anyway, I hope you found this video interesting and it makes good background noise. Please do let me know how you felt about Yves Route when you played it, because I thought it was quite good that you got to know more of the science and details behind, you know, the reasons as to why things are the way they are in the world, as well as Ceres. As always, thank you very much for watching. Remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and hopefully, maybe I'll see you in the next one where I'll be talking about the final route. Anyway, thank you. Bye.